Welcome to Legacy Black Power. 21 Black R&B legends who ruined their careers in seconds. Fame is fragile. One wrong move, one reckless decision, and everything can disappear in an instant. That's the unforgiving truth in the R&B world, where voices that once lit up the charts can just as quickly fade into silence. Careers aren't always lost over years. They can collapse in seconds. A violent scandal, a toxic relationship, a battle with addiction, or a brush with the law. Just one misstep can send even the brightest stars spiraling into darkness. This isn't some Hollywood script. It's the real, brutal story of 21 Black R&B singers who destroyed their own legacies in the blink of an eye. Hard to believe? Maybe. But behind the glittering lights and flashing cameras lies a much darker reality. The shadow that fame can never quite hide. Hank Ballard, the rebel who gave birth to the twist, ended his journey not in glory, but in disgrace, consumed by drugs and forgotten by the very world he once electrified. In the 1950s, he was the heartbeat of R&B rebellion. As a fiery leader of Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, he stormed the charts with Work With Me, Annie in 1954, a song so daring it was banned across America, yet secretly adored by every teenager who dared to sneak a listen. He didn't stop there. Ballard wrote and recorded the original version of the twist, the very song that later shook the globe when Chubby Checker's cover turned it into a cultural earthquake. For a moment, the world was his playground. Hank wasn't just making music. He was defining an era, but the spotlight is merciless. By the late 1960s, the world had moved on. New sounds, new faces, new idols. Hank Ballard, once the Rebel King, was no longer the voice of youth. Instead of adapting, he spiraled. Detroit clubs, New York parties, endless nights of liquor and smoke. Heroin became his comfort, marijuana his escape. Recording sessions turned into disasters. His bandmates grew tired of waiting, frustrated by the chaos. And while Chubby Checker basked in the glory of the twist, appearing on television, touring the world, and collecting praise, Hank seated in the shadows, feeling robbed, betrayed, and left behind. Then came the breaking point. In the early 1970s, on a cold Detroit morning, police stopped Hank's car for a routine check. What they found destroyed whatever was left of his career. Heroin, marijuana, and paraphernalia scattered across the seat. There was no denying it. Hank Ballard, the man who gave America the twist, was handcuffed on the spot. Within hours, headlines screamed across the nation. Hank Ballard busted in drug scandal. The fall was swift and brutal. King Records, already struggling after Sid Nathan's death, cut him loose without hesitation. Concerts were canceled overnight. Promoters erased his name from posters, and loyal fans drifted away in silence. Even the Midnighters, once his brothers in rhythm, walked out. No one wanted to stand beside a man branded an addict and a criminal. From there, he slipped into the shadows. The grand stages were gone. All that remained were cheap club gigs, fading applause, and a handful of aging fans who still remember the fire he once lit. Money dried up. His legacy overshadowed. The world still danced to the twist, but few remember the man who had written it. When Hank Ballard died in 2003, it was not with the fanfare of a legend, but with the silence of someone the world had already buried long before. No lavish funeral, no Hollywood tributes, just a few quiet lines in the papers. Once a rebel soul who shook America, Hank Ballard became a ghost of his own creation, a legend of his time, and then forgotten as if he had never existed. Ike Turner. Ike Turner's story is one of music's darkest contradictions. A genius who helped invent rock and roll, yet became a symbol of cruelty and abuse. Credited with launching the genre through Rocket 88 and igniting the 1960s with the electrifying Ike and Tina Turner Revue, he was once untouchable. With searing guitar riffs, unmatched showmanship, money, fame, and Tina Turner by his side, Ike held the world in his hands. But behind the glitter of the stage lights lived a truth far more sinister. By the late 60s, Ike wasn't just an artist. He was an addict, consumed by cocaine, alcohol, and an insatiable need for control. Tina was no longer a partner, but a possession. Backstage was hell. Beatings, threats with guns, forced performances even when she was sick. And in a society that largely turned a blind eye to domestic violence, Tina endured in silence. clinging to the stage as her only form of freedom. That silence shattered one night in July 1976 at the Dallas Statler Hilton. After a brutal beating, Tina fled the hotel, battered, bleeding, and carrying just 36 cents in her pocket. Few could have imagined that her escape would trigger one of the most catastrophic downfalls in modern music history. In 1981, Tina broke her silence in a People magazine interview, exposing the torment she had endured. Her story stunned the nation. Overnight, Ike was stripped of his legacy. Rolling Stone branded him the abuser. Radio stations banned his records. Labels cut ties. Fans turned away in disgust. His empire crumbled, leaving him isolated, broke, and battling constant legal troubles over drugs. His name no longer evoked innovation, only violence and shame. When Ike Turner died in 2007, his obituary wasn't a celebration of a rock and roll pioneer. It was a cautionary tale. The world remembered him not as a king, but as a villain who destroyed everything he once created. James Brown, the Soul King, and his shocking gun chase across America. James Brown wasn't just a godfather of soul. He was a global icon, a symbol of black pride, and a man whose music reshaped culture with classics like Papa's Got a Brand New Bag and Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. But by the late 1980s, the legend who electrified the world was unraveling before everyone's eyes. The glory had dimmed. Brown's life collapsed into a haze of drugs, paranoia, and uncontrollable rage. PCP, known as Angel Dust, was his poison, turning his brilliance into madness and burning through thousands of dollars a week. His marriage to Adrienne Rodriguez was a battlefield of violence and police calls. The icon who once commanded stages could no longer control his own demons. Then came September 24th, 1988, the day James Brown truly snapped. High! Paranoid and furious over something as trivial as someone using a bathroom near his office, Brown stormed into an insurance seminar waving a shotgun, demanding strangers stay off his turf. When police confronted him, he jumped into his pickup truck and roared off, igniting one of the wildest police chases in American music history. The pursuit tore across 2 states. Police riddled his tires with bullets as Brown swerved desperately, sparks flying from the rims until the truck finally collapsed. Officers yanked him from the driver's seat under flashing lights and chaotic shouts. The media descended instantly, branding him an out-of-control legend. Headlines screamed. Fans were divided, some heartbroken, others in denial. The verdict was swift. 6 years in prison, of which he served 2, but his career never recovered. Radio stations stopped playing songs. Concerts were canceled. Hollywood shut its doors. James Brown, once untouchable, was now seen as a public risk. That wild morning in 1988 didn't just end a high-speed chase. It sent the King of Soul's career spiraling into an abyss from which he would never climb back. Jackie Wilson, Mr. Excitement's final curtain call. Jackie Wilson wasn't just a singer. He was R&B's wildfire, a man who turned every stage into an inferno of sound and motion. Dubbed Mr. Excitement, he made audiences lose their minds with hits like Reet Petite and Lonely Teardrops. His soaring voice could pierce the soul, his electrifying dance moves rivaled James Brown, and his energy was nothing short of explosive. Jackie wasn't performing, he was detonating. But that brilliance came at a terrible cost. Behind the spotlight was a man consumed by hard living. Endless drinking, chain smoking, reckless habits, and a heart weighed down by personal demons. By 1975, the pressure was crushing him. Money problems, failed relationships, and a desperate need to keep up with a younger generation of stars. Still, Jackie pushed himself onto the stage, chasing the thrill that made him a legend. On September 25, 1975, at the Latin Casino in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, over 2,000 fans packed the room to see him one more time. Jackie walked out as he always had, confident, radiant, unstoppable. But his body had other plans. As he sang Lonely Teardrops, pouring every ounce of himself into words, he reached a haunting line, "My heart is crying." At that exact moment, Jackie crumpled as if struck by a bullet, his head slamming against the stage with a sound that silenced the room. The lights still blazed, the music kept playing, but Jackie lay motionless. The audience gasped in disbelief. Rushed to the hospital. Doctor confirmed the worst. A massive stroke. Jackie slipped into a deep coma that would last 9 long years. The world moved on without him. Newspapers blasted his reckless lifestyle. Record labels turned their backs, and the once sold-out stages never called his name again. Family battles over money replaced the roar of crowds. Friends drifted. Fans forgot. By the time Jackie Wilson drew his last breath in 1984, the man once hailed as the spark that set America dancing was a distant memory to many. A legend had fallen, not with the grace of farewell, but with a devastating crash of a body collapsing mid-song. For those who loved him, the tragedy was clear. Jackie didn't die in one moment. He was undone by years of fire burning too fast, too bright, with no one to slow the flame. Etta James, a voice that once silenced every stage, fell to the streets like a fugitive of her own demons. She was the soul of R&B, the woman who gave us timeless anthems like At Last and Tell Mama, her raw, fiery voice unmatched, irreplaceable. But behind the spotlight burned a life unraveling, consumed by drugs, violence, and loneliness. By 1974, at just 36, the rebel diva was gone. In her place was a frail woman, slumped in a beat-up car, chained to heroin. When Los Angeles police swarmed her vehicle, it wasn't just an arrest. It was the death of an era. Heroin, marijuana. Syringes scattered in the back seat told a story no stage could hide. Cuffed under flashing lights, Etta James, the queen who once moved a nation, became a headline. R&B icon falls in the heart of L.A. The court wasted no time. No escape routes, no excuses. She was locked away in the Tarzana Treatment Center, stripped of everything. No drugs, no alcohol, no adoring fans, just 4 walls and the agony of withdrawal. Her body shook, her once radiant eyes emptied. The same woman who set stages on fire was now trembling in silence. Chess records dropped her overnight. Concerts were canceled in droves. Friends and fans disappeared. The industry, once begging for her voice, now wanted nothing to do with her. From adored legend, untouchable outcast, Etta James had fallen from dazzling heights into a darkness the world didn't want to see. David Ruffin, the unforgettable voice behind My Girl, soared to the top of R&B before falling into shadows of drugs and ego. Born into poverty in Mississippi, scarred by violence and racism, he clawed his way into stardom with a voice that was equal parts velvet and fire. As a magnetic lead of the Temptations, Ruffin gave the world timeless anthems like My Girl and Ain't Too Proud to Beg. But the same success that crowned him king would soon destroy him. By the mid-60s, Ruffin was drowning in cocaine. Money poured in as fast as it poured out. Thousands blown monthly on wild parties across Detroit and Los Angeles. His demands grew outrageous. Private limos for himself alone, skipped shows, constant clashes with Motown execs and his bandmates. His arrogance carved rifts that could never be mended. Even at home, his marriage crumbled. His wife Nellie left to pick up the pieces as his image spiraled out of control. Fans who once adored him began to turn away. Then came June 1968. In Detroit, police pulled him over outside a nightclub, finding cocaine and marijuana in his bag. The arrest made headlines just as the Temptations had had enough. Ruffin was fired after missing a Cleveland show and insisting he should lead the group outright. Newspapers blasted the scandal. David Ruffin leaves Temptations, tied to cocaine, career in jeopardy. His fall from grace was no longer a whisper. It was front-page news. Motown washed its hands of him, pulling back support for his solo career. Contract vanished. Shows were canceled, and even loyal fans felt torn between admiration and disappointment. What followed was a downward spiral of addiction, arrogance, and shattered dreams. Though he continued to make music, Ruffin never reached those dizzying heights again. David Ruffin's story remains a haunting reminder. When unchecked pride and temptation collide with genius, even the brightest stars can burn out far too soon. Frankie Lymon. Frankie Lymon was a golden child of R&B, a Harlem-born prodigy who set America on fire at just 13 with Why Do Fools Fall in Love. For a brief, dazzling moment, he was every kid's dream, the teen idol who proved stardom could rise from poverty. But the spotlight that made him a legend also became the torch that burned him out. By 15, as a career soared, Frankie fell into heroin's deadly grip. Exploitative managers, racist barriers, and relentless industry pressure pushed him toward drugs as an escape. The hits slowed, the fame dimmed, and by the 1960s, his solo career had all but vanished. What little money he earned fed his addiction. Hundreds of dollars a week lost to heroin. Nights blurred into chaos. Endless parties, violent fights with his wife Elizabeth Waters, missed shows, broken promises, and family heartbreak. Even those who loved him most couldn't shield him from his own self-destruction. Then came the breaking point. In 1966, at only 24, Frankie was caught in a Harlem police raid, drunk, strung out, and carrying heroin, marijuana, and needles in his pockets. The press pounced, plastering headlines. Teen idol Frankie Lymon busted on drugs, career in ruins. Fans recoiled. Record labels abandoned him. And the industry that once crowned him a prince now cast him aside as a burden. By the late 60s, Frankie was no longer a superstar, just a ghost of his former self. Scraping by in small clubs, his extraordinary talent buried beneath scandal and addiction. 2 years later, in 1968, his tragic story ended in silence, a life cut short at only 25. Once the brightest spark in R&B, Frankie Lymon became a cautionary tale of how fame, temptation, and despair can devour even the most gifted soul. Sly Stone. Sly Stone wasn't just a musician, he was a funk genius, a revolutionary who built the very foundation of funk with earth-shaking anthems like Dance to the Music and Everyday People. His influence was timeless, his energy electric. But while the world saw a legend on stage, behind the scenes his life was unraveling in a storm of drugs, paranoia, and scandal. At the height of fame in the early 70s, Sly faced crushing pressure. His band was splintering, his lifestyle spinning out of control. His mansion became less a home and more of a fortress, packed with armed guards, cocaine, and chaos. He burned through cash like it was nothing, spending thousands each week on his addictions. Concerts grew unpredictable, starting late, collapsing mid-set, or being canceled altogether. Fans who once adored him began to turn, their patience gone. The breaking point came in December 1974. Los Angeles police stopped Sly's car and uncovered cocaine and an unregistered gun. Headlines exploded. Rolling Stone, the Los Angeles Times. Every outlet told the same story. The funk pioneer had fallen. His dazzling rise was now overshadowed by scandal, arrest, and the slow collapse of his legacy. Sly and the family Stone fell apart. Their music drowned beneath the noise of betrayal and disappointment. Record labels pulled away. Promoters cut ties. By the mid-70s, the man who once led a revolution in sound was left adrift, broken, and unable to recapture the glory that once seemed unstoppable. Bobby Womack's fall from grace. Bobby Womack, the soulful voice behind Looking for a Love, was once a rising star, guided and uplifted by his mentor and friend, the legendary Sam Cooke. But one fateful decision would turn admiration into outrage and cast a shadow over his entire career. In December 1964, tragedy struck when Sam Cooke was killed at just 33 years old. Still grieving, a 21-year-old Bobby shocked the world just 3 months later by marrying Sam's widow, Barbara. What might have been seen as a private choice of the heart became a public scandal. To the black community, still mourning its hero, the marriage wasn't just controversial, it was a betrayal. The black press, including Jet and Ebony, blasted Bobby, painting him as a man who had exploited his friend's death and Barbara's grief. The backlash was swift and merciless. Fans hurled objects at him during performances. Promoters pulled shows, and record deals dried up. His once bright future crumbled almost overnight. The marriage itself spiraled into turmoil, marred by allegations of domestic abuse, infidelity, and Bobby's growing dependence on cocaine. Even more scandal erupted when whispers spread of an affair with his teenage stepdaughter, cementing his reputation as a fallen figure. Through the late 60s and 70s, Bobby drifted in and out of music, but the hits never returned. His career, once a fortress of talent and promise, washed away like a sandcastle against the tide. Sam Cooke's towering legacy haunted him, and the weight of his own mistakes dragged him further down, from the heights of stardom to the depths of disgrace. Bobby Womack never imagined that a single wedding, meant to bring comfort, would instead unleash a storm that nearly destroyed him. Wilson Pickett, the man they call Wicked Pickett, was more than just a voice. He was fire itself. With electrifying hits like In the Midnight Hour and Mustang Sally, he carved his name into the very heart of R&B history. A black music icon, he smashed through racial barriers and won the love of millions. But behind the stage lights and screaming crowds, his life spiraled into chaos. By the 1970s, Pickett was drowning in alcohol and cocaine, living recklessly between Detroit and New York in a blur of parties. As disco and funk took over, the pressure weighed heavy. His marriage to Bonnie collapsed. Fights with managers erupted, and his temper grew dangerous. Bar brawls, public meltdowns, and violent outbursts became a tragic routine. Fame was slipping through his fingers. Then came October 15, 1987, the night that sealed his downfall. At a bar in Englewood, New Jersey, a drunken Pickett lashed out, smashing a beer bottle across a man's head. When police rushed in, they found cocaine stuffed in his pocket. The arrest made headlines nationwide. The New York Times blasted, "R&B star attacks, drugs involved." Overnight, the world watched a legend turn into a cautionary tale. Record labels cut ties. Promoters labeled him a liability. Even his most loyal fans began to walk away, heartbroken at the wreckage of the man they once idolized. The meteoric career that had lifted him to the top came crashing down, leaving only whispers of scandal and disappointment. For the rest of his life, Wilson Pickett lived in the shadow of his own destruction. No more chart toppers. No sold-out arenas. Just small gigs and fading memories. When he passed away in 2006, the world mourned not just a singer, but a fallen giant. A man whose brilliance was dimmed by the demons he could never escape. His story remains a haunting reminder of how quickly glory can be lost to self-destruction. Donny Hathaway, a bright star lost in darkness. Donny Hathaway, the golden voice of R&B and soul, rose like a comet with timeless classics, such as A Song for You and unforgettable duets with Roberta Flack, like Where's the Love? Born into a devout family in St. Louis, he carried both gospel roots and musical genius, leaving an indelible mark on the late 60s and early 70s. But behind the brilliance of his music was a private storm that would consume him: mental illness, addiction, and a haunting sense of paranoia. By the late 60s, bipolar disorder gripped Donny's life. Voices taunted him. Delusions that the CIA and mysterious white men were following him became a daily nightmare. To silence the torment, he turned to alcohol and barbiturates, spending hundreds of dollars a week in a dangerous attempt to escape. Pressure mounted from every direction. Record labels demanding endless tours, a wife and 2 children depending on him, managers clashing, and his own perfectionism tearing him apart. The control that once fueled his artistry began to unravel. In the summer of 1973, during sessions for extension of A Man in Chicago, Donny's paranoia erupted. He screamed about spies, smashed equipment, and spiraled into chaos until his family and colleagues had no choice but to hospitalize him. There, doctors confirmed what those closest to him already feared. Donny was battling bipolar disorder. The headlines exploded. Ebony and the Chicago Tribune declared his breakdown for the world to see. Donny Hathaway loses control. Fears for R&B star. Fans prayed for his recovery, but the industry turned cold. Concerts were canceled, deals dissolved, and Donny's once brilliant light began to dim. Though Extension of a Man proved to be his final masterwork, no breakthrough followed. By the mid-70s, Donny Hathaway had faded from the spotlight, trapped in the shadows of mental illness and addiction. His soaring career never recovered. And on a cold January night in 1979, the world lost him forever, a star who had once burned so brightly, collapsing into the darkness from which he could never escape. Arthur Conley, once hailed as the bold new voice of sweet soul music and personally mentored by Otis Redding, seemed destined for greatness. His smooth vocals and heartfelt delivery made him one of R&B's brightest young stars. But behind the music, his world was crumbling. Conley spiraled into addiction, booze, cocaine, and weed-fueled a reckless party lifestyle that quickly consumed him. By his early 20s, the stage that once celebrated him now exposed his decline. He stumbled through live performances, clashed with his record label Atco, and was branded by the press as a hopeless addict. Redding's tragic death in 1967 struck Conley like a thunderbolt, plunging him into chaos, anger, and destructive habits he couldn't escape. Fans who once adored him watched with heartbreak as their hero unraveled, and the industry that had once embraced him turned its back. In 1970, at only 24 years old, Conley fled America. He vanished to the Netherlands, reinventing himself under a new name, Lee Roberts, in an attempt to outrun his demons and bury a painful past. What might have been a glittering career instead became a story of exile, silence, and regret. Though he lived in relative obscurity until his death in 2003, the shadow of Arthur Conley lingers, a tragic reminder of a star who burned bright, fell hard, and left behind a haunting legacy of both brilliance and self-destruction. Rick James. Funk kings fall into darkness. Rick James, the electrifying force who lit up the world with Super Freak, once ruled funk from the throne of excess. He lived like a king in his mansion, drowning in wild parties, drugs, and endless women. But behind the glitter, his world was spiraling. By the mid-1980s, cocaine had its claws deep in him. Money slipped through his hands like water, and his once brilliant career began to crumble. Then came the nightmare. In July 1991, Rick James' girlfriend kidnapped a young woman, keeping her captive for 6 terrifying days. She was beaten, forced to take cocaine, and abused, a scandal so shocking it shattered the last remnants of his image. The following year, another violent outburst emerged when he assaulted a music executive. There was no hiding the chaos anymore. On August 2nd, 1993, a Los Angeles court sentenced the fallen funk star to over 5 years in prison for kidnapping, assault, and drug charges. The press tore him apart. Outrage erupted. Fans abandoned him. Radio stations banned his songs. The man once worshipped for his sound of freedom was now chained by his own demons. Released in 1996, Rick James walked out of prison a shadow of his former self. The glory was gone, replaced with scars that never healed. By 2004, his hard-living ways caught up with him. Lung and heart failure silenced the funk king forever. What remained was not just the music, but the tragic memory of a legend who burned too bright and fell too hard. Clyde McPhatter, the golden tenor of R&B, was a voice that once soared above the noise, but eventually sank under the weight of booze and heartbreak. As the founder of the Drifters, he gave the world unforgettable hits like Money Honey, and later carved out a solo career with songs like A Lover's Question. Born in North Carolina, Clyde rose to fame a voice that could melt hearts, yet behind the spotlight he faced racism, exploitation, and the crushing grip of the music industry. By 1968, his demons began spilling onto the stage. At a New York performance, drunk and furious, Clyde hurled curses at the crowd, only to be thrown out mid-show. His clashes with Mercury Records grew ugly, and soon he refused to record altogether, losing his contract and his standing in the business. The press painted him as a man drowning in whiskey, day after day, bottle after bottle, until his body could no longer keep up. His liver gave out, his health collapsed, and his mind unraveled. Once admiring fans turned away. The industry abandoned him. While new stars rose, Clyde sank deeper into loneliness and despair. In 1972, at just 39 years old, he was gone, another brilliant R&B pioneer cut down too soon, carrying with him the tragic story of a man who lost himself long before the music ever stopped. Dee Harvey was once a rising R&B talent, a backup singer for Patti LaBelle who carved out his own spotlight with soulful solo hits in the 1980s. Born in Chicago, Harvey carried the kind of voice that promised longevity in the industry. But instead of soaring higher, his career unraveled in a haze of scandal and addiction. In 1987, his downfall became front-page news when police pulled him over on Chicago's South Side. Inside his car, they discovered cocaine and an open bottle of liquor. The situation escalated when Harvey lashed out officers, sealing his fate in the eyes of the public. From there, the press feasted on stories of his wild parties, drug binges, and chaotic lifestyle. Record labels cut ties. Promoters stopped calling. Fans turned their backs. The man once hailed as a future R&B star slipped into obscurity, his career crushed by poor management personal demons, and a relentless glare of controversy. For years, Dee Harvey drifted in the shadows, his once promising voice silenced by choices that chained him to destruction. When he passed away in 2012, it wasn't with the fanfare of a celebrated artist, but with a heavy silence of life that had burned too bright, too fast, and tragically burned out. Chuck Woolery's rise and fall is a story of promise shattered by recklessness. As the lead voice of avant-garde, remembered for the 1960s hit Naturally Stoned, Woolery seemed destined to become R&B's next big star. Hailing from Kentucky, he carried the hopes of fans eager for fresh talent. But behind the spotlight, he spiraled into a self-destructive lifestyle. In 1968, after an all-night party in Los Angeles, Woolery drunkenly climbed into his Mustang and tore through a crowded neighborhood at more than 80 miles per hour. In an instant, the dream came crashing down. He lost control, slammed into a pole, and suffered devastating injuries to his head and leg. When police tested his blood, the results told the world what the press would soon amplify. Woolery's life was drowning in alcohol. The headlines were brutal, painting him as reckless and ruined. Record labels cut ties overnight. Fans turned their backs, and his shows disappeared one by one. His music career, once so full of promise, lay in ruins. Forced to abandon the stage, Woolery reinvented himself on television, but he never again returned to the microphone. What could have been a lasting R&B legacy instead ended in tragedy. A star's brilliance extinguished by booze, speed, and one horrific wreck. R. Kelly, once hailed as the king of R&B, rose from the streets of Chicago to global fame with chart-topping hits like I Believe I Can Fly. To millions, he was a dazzling star, a voice of inspiration. But behind the spotlight lurked a darkness that would eventually destroy him. For decades, whispers swirled about abuse, manipulation, and exploitation of young girls trapped in his orbit. On September 29, 2021, after a 6-week trial in Brooklyn, those whispers became undeniable truth. Victims took the stand, revealing chilling stories of kidnapping, forced labor, extortion, and abuse, backed by recordings, videos, and overwhelming evidence. The world watched in shock as the once beloved singer was convicted, his empire crumbling in real time. Radio stations silenced his music. Record labels abandoned him. The press tore apart his legacy. Public outrage exploded after the surviving R. Kelly documentary, fueling demand for justice. In the end, the man who once inspired millions was sentenced to 30 years in prison, branded not as a star, but as a predator. It was a fall with no redemption, an unfixable collapse. From the soaring heights of R&B royalty to the depths of disgrace, R. Kelly's name is now etched in history, not for his music, but for the crimes that destroyed his legacy. KCI's golden voice, once the soul of R&B, was slowly silenced by demons he couldn't escape. As the powerhouse lead of Jodeci and later half of the chart-topping duo KCI and JoJo, his voice carried anthems like All My Life into the hearts of millions. But behind the fame, the endless parties, the bottles of liquor, and the lines of cocaine dragged him from the heights of stardom into the abyss of addiction. On May 8, 2000, at the House of Blues in Los Angeles, KCI stumbled onto the stage. His eyes were glazed, his body unsteady, his voice slurred. Before a crowd of 1,500 fans, he sang off-key, stumbled through beats, and finally collapsed in front of a stunned audience. It wasn't just one bad night. It was a tragic unraveling of years of unchecked excess. The pressures of success, bitter band feuds, and constant clashes pushed him closer to the edge, and when the press captured that night on video, it spread like wildfire. His reputation crumbled, his fans lost faith, and the industry turned its back. Canceled shows, broken deals, no second chances. After that fall, KCI never regained his place on the charts. The once untouchable voice of R&B faded into silence, a haunting reminder of how fast greatness can be destroyed when addiction takes control. D'Angelo, the R&B prodigy whose velvety voice gave us Brown Sugar and the unforgettable Untitled, How Does It Feel?, was once hailed as music's ultimate sex symbol. Born in Virginia, he rose fast, setting a new standard for soul and R&B. But behind the fame, pressure, and sultry image was a man slipping into the grip of addiction and self-destruction. On the night of March 6, 2005, in Richmond, Virginia, D'Angelo hit rock bottom. Drifting behind the wheel, he lost control and slammed into a fence. When police arrived, they found cocaine and marijuana in his car. Intoxicated and combative, he fought against the handcuffs. It wasn't the first time. Just 3 years earlier, in 2002, another violent crash had left him seriously injured. But instead of serving as a wake-up call, it pulled him deeper into the spiral. The world watched as a once brilliant star unraveled. The crushing weight of his image as a sex symbol. The merciless pressure from EMI to deliver another masterpiece. And the constant media scrutiny pushed him further into chaos. Headlines grew cruel, fans grew distant, and the industry turned its back. Shows were canceled, record deals evaporated, and the golden boy of R&B faded from the spotlight. 2 decades later, D'Angelo remains one of the most tragic what-ifs in music history. No new anthems, no triumphant comeback, just the haunting memory of a rare talent. A man who gave the world so much soul, only to be consumed by the very demons he tried to escape. Cisco, once the golden boy of R&B, was a star who burned too hot, too fast. The world knew him as the wild genius behind Thong's song, and the frontman of Dru Hill, a Baltimore kid who rocketed to fame and had the industry at his feet. But behind the glitter was a darker story of excess, addiction, and violence. On December 14, 2000, at just 22 years old, Cisco's life took a devastating turn. Inside a Baltimore nightclub, fueled by alcohol and rage, he lashed out during a money dispute, viciously beating a man until police swarmed the scene. Arrested on the spot, the headlines came crashing down. MTV, the Baltimore Sun, every outlet screaming the same words: Cisco violent, R&B star falls. That single night marked the beginning of a freefall. Deals collapsed, concerts were canceled, fans turned their backs. The pressure of fame, bitter fights within Dru Hill, and nights lost in drugs and booze left him a shadow of the star he once was. No new hits, no spotlight. The shine faded, and Cisco slipped into near obscurity. Another cautionary tale of how quickly the dream can turn into a nightmare. Jaheim, the once soaring R&B star, brought down by scandal. With his powerful voice and heartfelt hit Put That Woman First, he ruled the early 2000s, a kid from the streets of New Jersey who became a symbol of hope. But behind the music, pressures mounted, label disputes, whispers of addiction, and battles he couldn't shake. On September 9th, 2021, everything came crashing down. Police stormed his Hillsborough, New Jersey home after horrifying reports of animal cruelty. What they found was unthinkable. 15 dogs starved and filthy, 6 locked in cramped cages, 1 so badly injured it had to be euthanized. The images shocked the world. TMZ broke the story. The New York Post splashed the headlines, and fans were left reeling in disbelief. Overnight, Jaheim's career crumbled. Concerts were canceled, the industry turned its back, and his name became a headline for all the wrong reasons. Fame was gone, money disappeared, and what was left was a man staring into darkness, facing devastating legal battles. Jaheim's fall is a chilling reminder. One reckless moment can erase years of triumph. A golden R&B career wiped out in an instant. If this story made you see him differently, let us know your thoughts and comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold truths behind the celebrities you thought you knew.